Sometimes the most innocent moments hide the darkest secrets. What started as a simple gesture of kindness over a shared Coca-Cola would unravel into a web of deception, power, and betrayal that would change two lives forever. This is the true story of how one man's act of generosity led him into the crosshairs of one of the most dangerous women he would ever meet. The summer heat was unbearable that July afternoon in 2019 when Marcus Chen first laid eyes on Elena Rodriguez.
He was sitting at a corner table in the small cafe near the Miami port, nursing his third cup of coffee and watching the endless stream of cargo ships moving in and out of the harbor.
As a maritime insurance investigator, Marcus had developed a keen eye for detail and an almost obsessive need to understand the patterns of port activity.
Today was supposed to be just another routine surveillance job monitoring a suspected insurance fraud case involving a shipping company. The cafe was nearly empty except for an elderly Cuban man reading his newspaper and a young mother trying to calm her restless toddler. That's when she walked in. Elena moved with the kind of confidence that made people notice, though she seemed to prefer blending into the background. She was perhaps in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and wearing clothes that suggested she worked somewhere in the port district. What struck Marcus immediately wasn't her appearance, but the way she carried herself. There was something almost military about her posture, a precision in her movements that spoke of discipline and control. She approached the counter and ordered a sandwich and a Coca-Cola, in accented English, though Marcus couldn't quite place the accent. Spanish, certainly, but there were undertones of something else. When she reached into her purse to pay, Marcus noticed her hands. They were small and delicate, but there were calluses on her palms and a small scar across her knuckles that suggested manual work or perhaps training of some kind. The cashier, a teenager who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, shook his head apologetically. The card reader was down, he explained, and they could only accept cash. Elena's face remained composed, but Marcus caught the slight tightening around her eyes as she checked her wallet. She was clearly short on cash. Without really thinking about it, Marcus stood up from his table. "Excuse me," he said, walking over to the counter. "I couldn't help but overhear. Please let me buy your lunch." He pulled out a $20 bill and handed it to the cashier before Elena could protest. She turned to look at him then, and Marcus found himself staring into the most intense brown eyes he had ever seen. They were beautiful, certainly, but there was something else there. A wariness, perhaps, or maybe calculation. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "That's very kind of you," she said finally, her accent more pronounced now. "But it's not necessary." "It's no trouble at all," Marcus replied, offering what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "Consider it a random act of kindness. The world could use more of those." She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read something there. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. It transformed her entire face, making her look younger and somehow more vulnerable. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'm Elena." "Marcus," he replied, extending his hand. Her handshake was firm, almost surprisingly so for someone her size. "Would you like to join me?" Marcus found himself asking, gesturing toward his table by the window. "I mean, if you're not in a hurry." Elena glanced toward the window, her gaze moving over the port activity with what Marcus would later realize was professional interest. "I have a few minutes," she said. They settled at his table, and Marcus couldn't help but notice how Elena positioned herself so she could see both the door and the window. Old habits, perhaps, or natural caution. She opened her Coca-Cola and took a sip, and Marcus watched as some of the tension seemed to leave her shoulders. "You work around here?" Marcus asked, trying to make conversation. "At the port," Elena replied, which wasn't really an answer. "Administrative work. Nothing exciting. What about you?" Marcus had learned long ago that being completely honest about his job as an insurance investigator tended to make people uncomfortable. "I work in maritime insurance," he said, which was true if incomplete. "Lots of paperwork, boring stuff mostly." Vanna had nodded, taking another sip of her Coca-Cola. "Insurance," she repeated thoughtfully. "That must require a lot of attention to detail." "It does," Marcus agreed. "You have to notice things that others might miss. Patterns, inconsistencies, things that don't add up." Something flickered in Elena's eyes at that comment, there and gone so quickly that Marcus almost missed it. "That sounds like important work," she said. "Making sure people are honest." "Something like that," Marcus replied, though he was beginning to sense undercurrents to this conversation that he didn't quite understand. They talked for another 20 minutes, and Marcus found himself increasingly intrigued by his lunch companion. Elena was clearly intelligent and well-educated, despite her claims of doing simple administrative work. She spoke knowledgeably about international trade, shipping routes, and port operations in a way that suggested much more than a basic clerical position. Yet whenever Marcus tried to steer the conversation towards specifics about her job or background, she deftly changed the subject. What struck him most was her obvious familiarity with the port operations visible through the cafe window. When a large container ship began maneuvering toward one of the loading docks, Elena watched with the kind of professional interest that Marcus recognized in himself. She knew which cranes would be used, which berths could accommodate vessels of that size, and even made an offhand comment about the ship's likely cargo based on its markings and route. "You know a lot about shipping for someone in administration," Marcus observed. Elena's smile was enigmatic. "You pick things up when you work around here long enough. A port becomes like a small city. You start to recognize the rhythms, the patterns. How long have you worked there?"
"A few years," she said vaguely.
"Time flies when you're busy." Marcus was about to ask another question when Elena's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, and her expression immediately became more serious. "I have to go," she said, standing quickly. "Thank you again for lunch. That was very generous." "Wait," Marcus said, also standing. "Maybe we could do this again sometime? I mean, have coffee or lunch?" Elena paused, studying his face again with that intense gaze. For a moment, Marcus thought she was going to say no. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a business card.
"My number,"
She said simply.
Marcus looked at the card.
It was plain white with just her name, Elena Rodriguez, and a phone number. No company name, no title, no email address. Just the basics. "I'll call you," he said.
"I hope you do," Elena replied, and there was something in her voice that made Marcus think she meant it. He watched through the window as she walked away, noting again that military bearing and the way she seemed to scan her surroundings without appearing to do so.
When she disappeared around a corner, Marcus looked down at the business card again. Something about this entire encounter felt significant, though he couldn't put his finger on exactly why. Over the next few days, Marcus found himself thinking about Elena Rodriguez more than he probably should have. There had been something almost magnetic about her, a combination of vulnerability and strength that he found compelling. But there had also been something else, something that his investigators' instincts were trying to tell him, even if his conscious mind wasn't ready to listen.
It was 3 days later when Marcus finally worked up the courage to call the number on the card.
The phone rang several times before Elena answered. "Hello, Marcus," she said, and he was surprised that she had apparently saved his number. "Hi, Elena. I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner sometime. Somewhere nicer than that cafe." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I'd like that," she said finally. "When were you thinking?" They arranged to meet at a restaurant in downtown Miami the following Friday evening. Marcus spent more time than usual getting ready, telling himself that this was just dinner with an interesting woman and trying to ignore the voice in his head that suggested there might be more to this than simple attraction. The restaurant Elena had suggested was upscale but not ostentatious, the kind of place that attracted business people and tourists without being flashy about it. Marcus arrived a few minutes early and was shown to a table with a view of Biscayne Bay. He was admiring the sunset over the water when Elaine arrived. She had clearly put effort into her appearance for their dinner date. Gone was the casual port worker attire, replaced by a simple but elegant black dress that suggested sophistication without being overdone. Her hair was down now, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she moved through the restaurant with the same confident grace that had first caught his attention.
"You look beautiful," Marcus said as she sat down, and was rewarded with one of those transformative smiles. "Thank you."
"You clean up pretty well yourself." The conversation over dinner was easier than Marcus had expected, flowing naturally from topic to topic. Elena was well-traveled and cultured, speaking knowledgeably about art, literature, and politics. She had opinions about everything from Latin American economics to European wine regions, and Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying the intellectual stimulation of her company.
Yet even as they talked and laughed, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Elena was performing somehow, presenting a carefully constructed version of herself rather than revealing who she really was. It wasn't that she seemed dishonest exactly, but rather that she was extraordinarily careful about what she chose to share and what she kept to herself.
When Marcus mentioned that he had grown up in California and moved to Miami for work, Elena nodded but didn't reciprocate with details about her own background. When he talked about his family, she listened attentively, but deflected questions about her own relatives. It was skillfully done, so smoothly that most people probably wouldn't have noticed. But Marcus's professional training had taught him to pay attention to conversational patterns and evasions. "Tell me more about your work at the port," Marcus said as they shared dessert. "What kind of administrative work do you do?" Elena's fork paused halfway to her mouth, just for a fraction of a second, before she continued eating. Scheduling, mostly. Coordinating shipments, making sure the right cargo gets to the right places at the right times. It's more complex than it sounds, but probably boring to most people. I don't find it boring at all, Marcus said honestly. Logistics is fascinating when you really think about it. All those moving pieces that have to work together perfectly.
Exactly, Elena said. And for the first time that evening, Marcus felt like he was getting a glimpse of the real woman behind the careful facade. Most people see a port and think it's just ships and containers, but it's really like conducting an orchestra.
Every element has to be in perfect harmony or the whole system breaks down. That's a beautiful way to put it, Marcus said. You must be very good at what you do. I try to be thorough, Elena replied, taking a sip of her wine. After dinner, they walked along the waterfront, and Marcus was struck again by how Elena seemed to notice everything around them. She commented on the types of boats moored at the marina, identified the origins of several large yachts by their flags and design, and even mentioned which shipping lanes the various lights on the horizon represented. For someone whose job was supposedly scheduling and paperwork, she had a remarkably comprehensive understanding of maritime operations. You really love the ocean, don't you? Marcus observed as they stood watching the lights reflect on the water. It's in my blood, I think, Elena said softly. My family has always been connected to the sea. Fishermen, sailors, traders. Water calls to water, as they say. It was the most personal thing she had shared all evening, and Marcus found himself wanting to know more. Where is your family from originally? Venezuela, Elena said after a slight hesitation. Though we've been scattered for years now. Politics, economics, you know how it is. Marcus nodded sympathetically. He knew that many Venezuelans had left their country in recent years due to the economic and political crisis. That must be difficult, being separated from family.
You adapt, Elena said simply.
You learn to make your own way in the world. There was something in her voice, a note of hardness or perhaps resignation, that made Marcus want to comfort her somehow. Instead, he simply moved a little closer as they walked and was pleased when she didn't pull away. When he drove her home later that evening, Elena directed him to a modest apartment complex near the Port District. 7. Check. It was clean and well-maintained, but not particularly upscale, the kind of place where working-class families and young professionals might live. Thank you for dinner, Elena said as he walked her to her door. I had a wonderful time. So did I, Marcus replied. I'd like to see you again. Elena looked up at him, and in the dim light of the building's entrance, her expression was unreadable. I'd like that too, she said finally. But Marcus, there are things about my life that are complicated. I want you to know that. Everyone has complications, Marcus said gently. I'm not looking for perfect. I'm just looking for real. Elena smiled at that, but there was something sad in her expression. Real, she repeated thoughtfully. That's harder to find than you might think. Before Marcus could ask what she meant by that, Elena had unlocked her door and stepped inside. Good night, Marcus, she said softly, and then the door closed between them. Driving home through the Miami night, Marcus replayed the evening in his mind. There had been moments of genuine connection, times when Elena's careful composure had slipped, and he had glimpsed something deeper and more authentic underneath. But there had also been moments when he felt like he was talking to someone who was playing a role, presenting exactly the version of herself that she wanted him to see. His investigator's instincts were telling him that Elena Rodriguez was not who she appeared to be, that there were layers to her story that she was keeping carefully hidden. The rational part of his mind suggested that he should be cautious, that getting involved with someone so obviously secretive was probably not wise. But there was something else, something stronger than caution or professional skepticism. He was genuinely attracted to Elena, not just physically, but intellectually and emotionally. There had been moments during their conversations when he had felt a connection that seemed real and meaningful, moments when her guard had come down and he had seen something in her eyes that spoke of loneliness and longing. Over the next several weeks, Marcus and Elena began seeing each other regularly. They had dinner at various restaurants around Miami, took walks along the beach, went to a few movies. Elena was always engaging company, intelligent and witty and surprisingly well-informed about a wide range of topics. She spoke Spanish, English, and what she claimed was a little Portuguese, though Marcus suspected her language skills were more extensive than she admitted. Gradually, Elena began to share more details about her background, though Marcus noticed that her stories didn't always add up perfectly.
She mentioned growing up in Caracas, but also made references to spending time in other parts of Venezuela and neighboring countries that suggested a more nomadic childhood than she initially described. She talked about working various jobs before coming to Miami, but was vague about timelines and specifics.
Most puzzling to Marcus was Elena's obvious expertise in maritime operations. During their conversations, she would casually mention details about shipping procedures, international trade regulations, and port security measures that went far beyond what someone in an administrative position would typically know. When Marcus commented on this, Elena would laugh it off, claiming that she was just naturally curious and liked to learn about the industries where she worked. "I've always been a sponge for information," she would say with that enigmatic smile. Knowledge is never wasted. Marcus's feelings for Elena continued to deepen despite his growing certainty that she was keeping significant secrets from him. There was something about her that drew him in, a combination of strength and vulnerability that he found irresistible. She seemed genuinely interested in his work and his thoughts, asked thoughtful questions, and listened with the kind of focused attention that made him feel like the most important person in the world. It was during their 6th date, at a small Italian restaurant in Little Havana, that Marcus first began to suspect that Elena's secrets might be more serious than he had imagined. They were discussing a news story about drug trafficking in the Caribbean when Elena made an offhand comment about interdiction strategies that revealed an unusually detailed understanding of law enforcement tactics. "How do you know so much about Coast Guard operations?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Elena's fork paused over her pasta, and Marcus caught a flash of something in her eyes before her expression became neutral again. "I read a lot," she said simply. "And you hear things when you work at a port. Law enforcement agencies are always around."
It was a reasonable answer, but something about the way she delivered it made Marcus's investigator instincts ping with warning signals.
There had been too much specificity in her earlier comment, too much familiarity with procedures and terminology that most civilians wouldn't know.
That night, after dropping Elena off at her apartment, Marcus made a decision that he would later regret. He drove to his office and logged into the various databases that his insurance company maintained for background checks and fraud investigations. Using Elena's name and the phone number from her business card, he began searching for information about Elena Rodriguez. What he found was almost nothing. There were dozens of Elena Rodriguez's in various databases, but none of them matched the woman he had been dating. No employment records at any Port of Miami companies, no credit history, no property records, no social media presence. It was as if Elena Rodriguez had appeared out of thin air a few years ago with no past and no digital footprint. Marcus stared at his computer screen, feeling a cold knot forming in his stomach. In his professional experience, people who maintained such complete anonymity usually had something significant to hide. The question was what, and how dangerous it might be. Despite his growing concerns, Marcus couldn't bring himself to confront Elena directly or to stop seeing her. He told himself that everyone deserved privacy, that perhaps she was simply someone who valued discretion. Maybe she was in the country illegally and was being cautious for that reason. Maybe she had escaped an abusive relationship and was protecting herself. There could be dozens of innocent explanations for her secretive nature, but late at night when he was alone with his thoughts, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something much more dangerous than a complicated immigration status or a difficult past relationship. There had been too many small inconsistencies, too many moments when Elena's carefully constructed persona had slipped to reveal someone much more knowledgeable and experienced than she pretended to be. The answer would come sooner than he expected, and when it did, Marcus would realize that his simple act of kindness in buying Elena Rodriguez a Coca-Cola had set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything he thought he knew about right and wrong, loyalty and betrayal, and the thin line between love and survival. The truth began to unravel on a humid Thursday evening in August. Exactly 2 months after Marcus had first met Elena in that small cafe. He was working late at his office, reviewing insurance claims related to a suspicious warehouse fire near the port, when his phone buzzed with a text message from Elena. "Can you meet me tonight? It's important. The old pier at Virginia Key. 11 p.m. Marcus stared at the message, feeling an immediate sense of unease. In all the time they had been seeing each other, Elena had never been so cryptic or suggested meeting in such an isolated location. Virginia Key Beach was largely abandoned after dark, and the old pier she was referring to was a crumbling concrete structure left over from the area's industrial past. His first instinct was to call her back and suggest meeting somewhere public instead, but something in the tone of her message made him hesitate. Elena wasn't someone given to drama or unnecessary secrecy. If she was asking him to meet her at such an unusual place and time, she probably had a good reason.
Marcus arrived at the pier 15 minutes early, parking his car in the empty lot and walking out onto the weathered concrete structure that extended into the dark waters of Key Biscayne Bay.
The night was clear, with a nearly full moon casting silver reflections on the gentle waves. In the distance, he could see the lights of downtown Miami and the port facilities, their constant activity a stark contrast to the isolation of this abandoned piece of infrastructure. He had been waiting for about 10 minutes when he heard footsteps behind him. Turning, Marcus expected to see Elena walking toward him alone. Instead, he saw her approaching with two men he had never seen before. The men were clearly not casual companions. Both were dark-haired and powerfully built, moving with the kind of alert awareness that Marcus associated with military or law enforcement backgrounds.
They flanked Elena as she walked, not quite close enough to be obviously protective, but positioned in a way that suggested professional training.
Marcus, Elena called out as they reached the end of the pier.
"Thank you for coming." "Elena," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady despite the sudden spike of adrenaline he was feeling. "What's this about? Who are these men?" Elena looked different than he had ever seen her before. Gone was any pretense of the vulnerable port worker or the carefully composed dinner companion.
The woman standing before him radiated authority and confidence in a way that was both compelling and deeply unsettling.
"My associates," Elena said simply, gesturing to the two men.
"We need to talk, and I wanted to make sure we wouldn't be interrupted." "About what?" Marcus asked, though he was beginning to suspect that he already knew the answer. Elena studied his face in the moonlight, and Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling that she was reading every emotion and thought that crossed his features. "About who I really am," she said finally, "and about what I need from you." The next few minutes would forever change Marcus's understanding of the woman he thought he had been falling in love with. Elena Rodriguez, as it turned out, was not an administrative worker at the Port of Miami. She was not even really Elena Rodriguez, though that was the identity she had been using for the past 3 years. Her real name was Elena Vasquez, and she was the operational commander of one of the most sophisticated smuggling networks operating in the Caribbean. Not drugs, as Marcus first assumed, but something potentially even more dangerous: people. Specifically, high-value individuals fleeing various legal troubles, political persecution, or criminal investigations who were willing to pay enormous sums to disappear completely and start new lives with clean identities. "I run a fleet," Elena explained matter-of-factly, as if she were discussing a legitimate shipping business. 12 vessels, ranging from fishing boats to luxury yachts to small cargo ships. "We move people who need to disappear, and we move them safely and completely. New identities, new backgrounds, new lives in countries where they can start over." Marcus felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. "You're talking about human trafficking." Elena's expression hardened slightly. "I'm talking about providing a service to people who desperately need it: politicians fleeing corrupt governments, businessmen escaping false accusations, families trying to protect their children from cartel violence. We don't traffic victims, Marcus. We transport clients. Clients who pay you how much?" Marcus asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "Depending on the level of service required, anywhere from $50,000 to $500,000 per person," Elena replied without hesitation. "For that price, they get safe transport, complete documentation, and a guaranteed new life in a country where they can live without fear." The numbers were staggering, and Marcus quickly did the mathematics in his head. Even if Elena's operation only moved a few dozen people per year, the revenue would be in the millions. No wonder she could afford to operate a fleet of vessels and maintain the kind of sophisticated logistics network that her business would require. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked, dreading the answer. "Because I need your help," Elena said simply, "and because I think you care enough about me to provide it." What Elena needed, she explained, was access to maritime insurance records and investigative files. Her organization had been experiencing increased scrutiny from various law enforcement agencies, both American and international. Coast Guard patrols had become more frequent and more targeted, suggesting that someone was providing authorities with specific intelligence about her operations. Elena suspected that there was a leak somewhere in her network, someone passing information to law enforcement about her routes, schedules, and client movements. To identify the source of the leak, she needed to understand exactly what the authorities knew and how they were getting their information. Insurance investigators have access to databases and communication networks that even I can't penetrate, Elena explained. Shipping manifests, cargo inspections, port security reports, vessel tracking data. You could help me identify where the information is coming from and who might be providing it.
Marcus stared at her, struggling to process what he was hearing. The woman he had been dating, the woman he had been falling in love with, was not only a criminal but was asking him to become an accessory to her crimes.
I can't do that, he said finally. Elena, what you're describing is conspiracy, obstruction of justice, maybe treason depending on who your clients are. I could lose my job, my license, maybe go to prison. Elena nodded as if she had expected this response. I understand your concerns, she said calmly. But I think you should understand the full situation before you make your final decision. That's when Elena revealed the extent to which she had been manipulating him from the very beginning. Their meeting in the cafe had not been coincidental. Elena had been watching Marcus for weeks, learning about his routines, his personality, his vulnerabilities. She had chosen that particular cafe because she knew he conducted surveillance from there, and she had timed her visit to coincide with his presence. The credit card machine malfunction that had prevented her from paying for her lunch had been staged. Elena had contacts among the cafe's staff who had disabled the card reader on her signal, creating the opportunity for Marcus to offer his assistance and begin their relationship. Everything? Marcus asked, feeling sick to his stomach.
Our entire relationship was planned.
Not everything, Elena said, and for the first time that evening, her composed facade cracked slightly. Marcus, I won't lie to you.
Yes, I approached you deliberately because I thought you might be useful to my organization. But what developed between us, the feelings I have for you, those are real. I never expected to care about you the way I do. Marcus wanted to believe her, but everything he thought he knew about Elena had just been revealed as a lie. How could he trust anything she said about her feelings when their entire relationship had been built on deception? The things you told me about your background, your family, your work, Marcus said. Was any of it true? Some of it, Elena admitted. I am from Venezuela originally, and my family was involved in shipping and maritime trade. But not the kind of honest shipping you might imagine. My father ran contraband between the Caribbean islands. My uncle was involved in moving political refugees during various coups and revolutions. I grew up understanding that sometimes the legal way isn't the only way, or even the right way. Elena went on to explain that she had been involved in various forms of smuggling and illegal transport for over a decade. She had started by helping political dissidents escape Venezuela during the worst periods of government repression, then expanded to assist other refugees and asylum seekers who couldn't navigate legal immigration processes. Over time, her clientele had evolved to include not just political refugees, but also business people fleeing corruption charges, wealthy individuals avoiding tax investigations, and occasionally people who were simply tired of their old lives and wanted to start completely over. The common thread was that all of her clients had the resources to pay for her services and the desperate need to disappear completely. I'm good at what I do, Elena said with obvious pride. In 8 years of operations, I've never lost a client. Everyone who pays for my services gets exactly what I promise: safe transport and a completely new identity that will stand up to any investigation. And now you want me to help you protect that business by spying on law enforcement? Marcus said. I want you to help me identify a security breach that could get innocent people killed, Elena replied sharply. Marcus, some of my clients are families with children who are fleeing cartel violence or political persecution. If law enforcement intercepts them during transport, they don't just get arrested and deported, they get sent back to situations where they will be murdered. It was a compelling argument, and Marcus could see the sincerity in Elena's eyes when she talked about protecting her clients. But he also understood that regardless of her motivations, what she was asking him to do was illegal and would make him a criminal accomplice. I need time to think about this, Marcus said finally. Of course, Elena agreed. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. Now that you know about my organization, you're either part of it or you're a potential threat to it. I care about you, and I want you to be part of it, but I can't allow you to be a threat. The implication was clear, and Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining reality, Elena said calmly. You know enough about my operations to cause serious damage if you decided to go to the authorities. I trust you, and I believe you care enough about me not to do that, but I can't base the safety of my entire organization on trust and hope. One of Elena's associates, who had been silent throughout the conversation, stepped forward slightly. Marcus noticed that the man's jacket was unbuttoned, and his right hand was positioned near what was obviously a concealed weapon. What are you saying exactly? Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm saying that you have 3 choices, Elena replied. You can help me identify the security leak and become a valuable part of my organization. You can walk away tonight and never speak of what you've learned, in which case we'll part as friends, but you'll never see me again. Or you can decide to cause problems for me and my people, in which case you'll become a problem that needs to be solved. Marcus understood the third option perfectly. Elena was telling him that if he went to the authorities, he would be killed. How long do I have to decide, he asked.
48 hours, Elena said. Meet me at the same cafe where we first met, Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock.
You can give me your answer then. Elena turned to leave, then paused and looked back at him. Marcus, I want you to know that despite how this started, what I feel for you is real. I hope you'll choose to trust me and work with me. We could have something extraordinary together. Then she was walking away, her two associates flanking her as they disappeared into the shadows beyond the pier. Marcus stood alone in the moonlight, listening to the gentle lapping of waves against the concrete pilings, and trying to process what had just happened to his life. The drive home felt surreal, as if he were moving through a dream, or watching someone else's life unfold from a distance. Everything he thought he knew about Elena had been a lie, but everything he felt for her was still painfully real. She was a criminal who had manipulated and deceived him from the very beginning. But she was also the woman who had made him laugh harder and think deeper than anyone he had ever known. Back in his apartment, Marcus poured himself a large whiskey and sat on his balcony overlooking Biscayne Bay, staring out at the same waters where Elena's fleet presumably operated. The rational part of his mind knew exactly what he should do. He should go to the FBI or the Coast Guard, report everything Elena had told him, and let law enforcement handle the situation. But it wasn't that simple. Elena had made it clear that choosing to cooperate with authorities would likely result in his death. Even if he survived long enough to testify against her, what kind of life would he have afterwards? Living in witness protection, constantly looking over his shoulder, knowing that a powerful and resourceful criminal organization considered him a threat? There was also the uncomfortable reality that some of what Elena had said resonated with him. If she truly was helping political refugees and families fleeing violence, was what she was doing entirely wrong? The legal immigration system was notoriously slow and bureaucratic, often failing people who needed immediate help. If Elena was providing that help to people who could afford it, was she really a villain or simply someone operating outside legal boundaries for defensible reasons? Marcus spent the next 2 days in a state of mental turmoil, weighing his options and trying to decide what kind of person he wanted to be. He researched Elena's claims about the difficulties facing political refugees and asylum seekers and found that much of what she had said was accurate. The legal processes for escaping dangerous situations were often inadequate, sometimes fatally so. He also researched maritime smuggling operations and was surprised to learn how sophisticated and extensive such networks had become. Elena's claim to operate a 12-vessel fleet was not as outlandish as it had initially seemed. Several major smuggling organizations had been exposed in recent years that operated on similar scales. By Friday evening, Marcus had made his decision, though he wasn't entirely sure it was the right one. He was going to meet Elena as scheduled and hear what she had to propose. He wasn't ready to commit to helping her, but he also wasn't ready to condemn her without understanding more about what she actually did and why she did it. Saturday afternoon arrived gray and humid, with the kind of oppressive heat that made Miami feel like a tropical greenhouse. Marcus arrived at the cafe a few minutes early and chose the same table where he had first seen Elena 2 months earlier. The irony of the location was not lost on him. He had bought her a Coca-Cola as a simple act of kindness, and now he was meeting her to discuss becoming an accomplice to federal crimes. Elena arrived exactly on time, alone this time, but moving with the same confident bearing that Marcus now recognized as her natural state rather than a performance. She was dressed casually but expensively, and she carried herself like someone accustomed to command and control. "Marcus," she said, sliding into the chair across from him, "have you made your decision?" "I want to know more," Marcus replied. "About your clients, your operations, what exactly you would need from me." Elena smiled, and Marcus caught a glimpse of genuine warmth that reminded him of why he had been attracted to her in the first place. "I was hoping you'd say that." Over the next hour, Elena painted a detailed picture of her organization and operations. Her fleet consisted of vessels ranging from converted fishing boats to luxury yachts, all carefully modified for long-range operation and equipped with sophisticated communication and navigation equipment. She employed over 30 people in various capacities: boat crews, document forgers, safe house operators, intelligence analysts, and security personnel. Her clients came from all over the world, but primarily from Latin America, Eastern Europe, and parts of Asia, where political and economic instability created large populations of people desperate to escape. The wealthiest clients paid for luxury service, transport on well-appointed yachts with excellent food and accommodations, followed by settlement in desirable locations with thoroughly documented new identities. Less affluent clients received more basic service but the same guarantee of safety and successful relocation. Elena took obvious pride in explaining that her organization had never failed to deliver a client safely to their desired destination, and that none of her clients had ever been discovered or compromised after receiving new identities.
The key to success in this business, Elena explained, is attention to detail and comprehensive planning. We don't improvise, we don't take unnecessary risks, and we don't cut corners on security or documentation.
Our clients pay premium prices because they receive premium service. Marcus found himself impressed despite his moral reservations. Elena was describing a sophisticated international business operation that required extensive logistical coordination, technical expertise, and human resource management. Whatever else she might be, she was clearly an extremely capable executive and strategist.
"What would you need from me specifically?" Marcus asked. Elena pulled out a tablet and showed him a map of the Caribbean and South Florida coastline marked with various shipping routes and patrol patterns.
"We've been having problems with interdiction attempts," she explained. "Coast Guard and DEA vessels appearing in places where they shouldn't know to look. At times when they shouldn't know to be watching. Someone is providing law enforcement with intelligence about our operations." What Elena needed was access to the databases and communication networks that maritime insurance investigators use to track vessel movements, cargo manifests, and security reports. By analyzing the information that law enforcement agencies were receiving, Elena hoped to identify patterns that would reveal which of her people was passing information to authorities. "I'm not asking you to steal anything or provide ongoing intelligence," Elena emphasized. "Just help me run a few queries to identify the source of the leak. Once I know who's talking to law enforcement, I can address the problem and secure my operations." "Address the problem how?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Elena's expression became slightly harder. "That would depend on the specifics of the situation. Ideally, we would simply remove the individual from any position where they could continue to cause damage. Sometimes that means reassignment, sometimes it means termination of employment, and sometimes it means termination of a different kind," Marcus said. Elena didn't deny it. "Marcus, I operate in a world where betrayal can get people killed. Not just me and my organization, but the clients who trust us to protect them. If someone in my network is collaborating with law enforcement, they're not just threatening my business. They're threatening the lives of families who are depending on us to get them safely away from people who want to murder them." It was a compelling argument, but Marcus couldn't ignore the fact that Elena was essentially asking him to help her identify someone who would likely be killed for cooperating with law enforcement. Even if that person was betraying refugees and asylum seekers, was Marcus comfortable being part of what would probably amount to an execution? "I need more time," Marcus said finally. Elena nodded, though Marcus detected a slight tightening around her eyes. "How much more time?" "A week. I'll give you my final answer next Saturday." "Very well," Elena agreed. "But Marcus, understand that the longer this situation continues, the more dangerous it becomes for everyone involved, including you." Helena reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm and familiar, and Marcus felt the same electric connection that had drawn him to her from the beginning. "I know this is difficult," she said softly. "I know I've asked you to reconsider everything you thought you knew about right and wrong. But Marcus, I need you to understand that sometimes doing the right thing requires operating outside the law. Sometimes protecting innocent people means breaking rules that were written by people who don't understand the complexities of the real world." Marcus looked into Elena's eyes and saw something that might have been genuine affection, or might have been masterful manipulation. After everything he had learned about her capacity for deception, he was no longer sure he could tell the difference. "I'll give you my answer next week," he repeated. Elena squeezed his hand once more, then stood to leave. "I hope you'll choose to trust me," she said. "I think we could accomplish extraordinary things together." After she left, Marcus remained at the table for another hour, staring out at the port activity that had become the backdrop to the most complicated decision of his life. In 1 week he would have to choose between his career, his principles, and quite possibly his life. The woman he had fallen in love with had turned out to be someone completely different than he had imagined, but his feelings for her remained frustratingly unchanged. As the afternoon shadows grew longer, Marcus finally understood that his simple act of buying Elena Rodriguez a Coca-Cola had set in motion a chain of events that would force him to discover what kind of man he really was. Marcus spent the next 5 days in a state of constant internal conflict, alternating between moments of clarity and periods of profound confusion about what he should do. He found himself unable to concentrate on his regular work, mechanically going through the motions of investigating routine insurance claims, while his mind wrestled with the impossible choice Elena had presented to him. On Tuesday, he made a decision that he hoped would provide some clarity. Instead of spending another sleepless night debating abstract moral principles, Marcus decided to conduct his own investigation into Elena's organization. If he was going to make a choice that could determine the course of the rest of his life, he wanted to base that choice on facts rather than emotions. Using the resources available through his insurance company, Marcus began researching maritime activity patterns in the Caribbean and South Florida. He looked for vessels that appeared repeatedly in shipping manifests but with inconsistent cargo descriptions, boats that changed registration frequently, and patterns of movement that suggested something other than legitimate commercial activity.
What he found was both more and less than he had expected. There was indeed evidence of sophisticated smuggling operations in the region, with several networks apparently moving people and goods through a complex web of routes and waypoints.
However, identifying Elena's specific organization proved more difficult than Marcus had anticipated. Elena had not been exaggerating when she claimed to run a professional operation. The vessels and activities that Marcus suspected might be connected to her network showed all the hallmarks of careful planning and sophisticated operational security. False documentation was expertly crafted, routes were varied and unpredictable, and communications appeared to be encrypted and compartmentalized. Marcus was beginning to appreciate the extent to which Elena had built something that resembled a legitimate international business, albeit one that operated entirely outside legal boundaries. The scale and sophistication of what she had described was not the product of amateur criminals or desperate opportunists. This was the work of someone with extensive training, significant resources, and genuine organizational talent. By Thursday, Marcus had made another discovery that complicated his moral calculus even further. Through careful analysis of shipping records and cross-referencing with news reports and diplomatic cables, he found evidence that suggested Elena's organization was indeed helping people escape genuine danger. Several of the vessel movements that Marcus suspected were connected to Elena's network coincided with periods of political upheaval in various Latin American countries. The timing and destinations suggested that her claims about transporting political refugees and families fleeing violence were at least partially accurate. Marcus found himself thinking about Elena's argument that sometimes protecting innocent people required breaking laws that were inadequate to address complex humanitarian situations. The legal immigration and asylum processes were notoriously slow and bureaucratic, often failing people who needed immediate help. If Elena was providing that help to people who desperately needed it, was she really a criminal, or was she filling a gap left by inadequate government systems? On Friday evening, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of waiting until their scheduled meeting on Saturday, he called Elena and asked if they could meet that night to discuss the situation further. "Of course," Elena replied immediately. "Where would you like to meet?" "Somewhere we can talk privately," Marcus said. "Your apartment?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure about that? Once you come to my home, there's no pretending this is just a casual relationship anymore." "I'm sure," Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely certain what he meant by that. Elena's apartment was not what Marcus had expected. From the outside, the building looked like standard middle-class housing, but Elena's unit had been extensively modified and upgraded. The space was larger than it should have been, apparently created by combining multiple units, and it was filled with high-end electronics and communication equipment. What struck Marcus most was the apartment's obvious function as a command center. Multiple computer screens displayed maps, shipping schedules, and what appeared to be real-time tracking information for various vessels. Communication equipment that Marcus didn't recognize hemmed quietly in one corner, and the walls were covered with charts and photographs that clearly related to maritime operations. "This is impressive," Marcus said, looking around at what was obviously a sophisticated operational headquarters. "I don't do anything halfway," Elena replied, watching his reaction carefully. "Can I get you something to drink? Coffee? Wine? Coca-Cola?" Marcus caught the reference to their first meeting and smiled despite everything. "Coffee would be good."
As Elena prepared coffee in her kitchen, Marcus studied the information displayed on her computer screens. He could see real-time positions for what appeared to be 12 vessels, exactly as Elena had claimed.
Each vessel was identified by a code name rather than a registration number, and their positions were updated continuously. "Your fleet," Marcus observed. "Currently dispersed across the Caribbean," Elena confirmed, bringing him a cup of coffee. 3 vessels are en route to pickup locations. 2 are in transit with clients, 4 are in port for maintenance and resupply, and 3 are standing by for emergency operations. Marcus was struck by the professional nature of Elena's operation. This was not a criminal enterprise in any traditional sense, but rather something that resembled a small navy or a specialized transportation company.
The level of coordination and real-time communication suggested resources and expertise that went far beyond what Marcus had imagined. "Elena," Marcus said, settling onto her couch, "I need you to be completely honest with me about something." "I'll try," Elena replied, sitting down across from him. "Are you working for someone else? A government? An intelligence agency, something like that?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus's face with that intense gaze that had first intrigued him months ago.
"What makes you ask that?" "This," Marcus said, gesturing around the apartment. "The sophistication of your operation. The resources you obviously have access to. The training you clearly received somewhere. This isn't something that someone builds from scratch as a private enterprise. You're either working for someone with substantial resources, or you used to work for someone like that and you took their training and contacts with you when you left." Elena smiled, but there was something sad in her expression. "You're very perceptive. That's one of the things I've always liked about you. So which is it?" Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the lights of the port district. "Both, in a way. I used to work for Venezuelan naval intelligence, back when there was still a functional Venezuelan navy. My job was coordinating maritime security operations and interdicting smuggling vessels." She turned back to face Marcus. "I was good at my job. Very good. I understood how smuggling operations worked because I spent years trying to stop them. I knew their routes, their methods, their weaknesses. I also knew how law enforcement agencies tracked and intercepted them." "What happened?" "Venezuela happened," Elena said simply. "The government collapsed, the economy collapsed, everything collapsed. The Navy stopped functioning, intelligence services became corrupt, and people like me had to make choices about what we were going to do with our training and experience." Elena explained that she had initially tried to maintain her position within the remnants of Venezuelan naval intelligence, but had become disgusted with the corruption and incompetence that had taken over the organization. When she was ordered to participate in operations that amounted to little more than state-sponsored piracy, she had decided to leave. "I took my training, my contacts, and my understanding of maritime operations, and I decided to use them to help people rather than to rob them," Elena continued. "I started by helping political dissidents escape Venezuela, then expanded to assist other refugees and asylum seekers who couldn't navigate legal immigration processes." "And now you run a fleet that generates millions of dollars in revenue," Marcus pointed out. "Yes," Elena agreed without hesitation. "I charge premium prices because I provide premium service. My clients pay well because they receive exactly what they need: safe transport and a completely new life, with documentation that will stand up to any investigation." Elena returned to her seat and looked directly at Marcus. "I'm not going to pretend that I'm running a charity. I charge what the market will bear, and I've become wealthy providing services that desperate people need." "But Marcus, every person I've transported has been someone fleeing genuine danger. Political persecution, cartel violence, ethnic cleansing, religious extremism. I don't transport criminals or terrorists. I transport victims."
How do you verify that? Marcus asked.
"How do you know your clients are really victims and not criminals using your services to escape justice?"
Extensive background investigations, Elena replied.
"I have contacts in intelligence services throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. Before I accept any client, I verify their story, confirm the threats they're facing, and ensure that they're not wanted for serious crimes."
Elena stood up and walked to a file cabinet, returning with a thick folder. "These are my current clients," she said, handing Marcus the folder. "Do you like him also to it?"
"Read their stories, and then tell me whether you think what I'm doing is wrong." Marcus opened the folder and found detailed dossiers on 15 different individuals and families. As he read through the files, he felt his moral certainty beginning to erode even further. There was Maria Santos, a journalist from Honduras who had been receiving death threats from cartel members after publishing articles about corruption.
Her teenage daughter had been kidnapped and held for 3 days as a warning before being released unharmed.
Legal asylum processes would take months or years, during which time Maria and her family would remain at risk. There was Dr. Pavel Kowalski, a physician from Belarus who had been treating protesters injured during political demonstrations. Government security forces had raided his clinic and arrested several of his patients. Colleagues had warned Dr. Kowalski that he was on a list of medical professionals marked for prosecution as enemies of the state. There was the Chen family from Myanmar, ethnic minorities who had fled escalating violence in their home region. The parents were university professors who had been dismissed from their positions and blacklisted for their political views. Their 2 teenage children had been expelled from school and denied access to educational opportunities,
Every file told a similar story. People facing genuine persecution or violence who needed immediate help that legal immigration processes could not provide quickly enough. Marcus found himself understanding why Elena's clients were willing to pay enormous sums for her services, and why Elena took pride in the work she was doing. These people, Marcus said finally, looking up from the files. They're all legitimate refugees. Every single one, Elena confirmed. I turn away at least 3 potential clients for every one I accept precisely because I want to make sure that everyone I help genuinely deserves help.
Marcus set down the folder and looked around Elena's command center again.
And the leak you're trying to identify. The person passing information to law enforcement. They're endangering people like this. Exactly, Elena said. Marcus, whoever is betraying my organization isn't just threatening my business. They're threatening the lives of families who have already lost everything and are depending on me to get them to safety. For the first time since learning the truth about Elena, Marcus felt like he understood her perspective completely. The people in those files were not criminals or opportunists trying to game the immigration system. They were genuine refugees facing real dangers who needed help that legal processes could not provide in time to save them.
Show me exactly what you need, Marcus said quietly.
Elena's face lit up with what appeared to be genuine relief and gratitude.
Thank you, she said simply. I know this isn't easy for you. Over the next 2 hours, Elena walked Marcus through the specific information she needed to identify the security leak in her organization. The process was more complex than Marcus had initially understood, requiring careful analysis of multiple databases and communication networks to identify patterns that would reveal the source of intelligence leaks. Elena needed access to Coast Guard patrol schedules and route planning data, DEA interdiction reports, and maritime security bulletins that were circulated among law enforcement agencies.
By comparing this information with the details of her own operations, Elena hoped to identify which of her people had access to the specific intelligence that was being passed to authorities. The key is timing and specificity, Elena explained, showing Marcus charts and graphs on her computer screens.
Law enforcement agencies are receiving information that is too accurate and too timely to be coming from routine intelligence gathering. Someone in my organization is providing real-time updates about our operations.
Marcus studied the information Elena was showing him and had to admit that her analysis appeared sound. The pattern of interdiction attempts suggested that law enforcement was receiving detailed operational intelligence from someone with intimate knowledge of Elena's activities.
How many people in your organization would have access to this kind of information? Marcus asked. No more than 6 or 7, Elena replied. I compartmentalize information carefully to limit security risks. Only my most senior people know enough about our overall operations to provide the kind of detailed intelligence that law enforcement is obviously receiving.
And you suspect someone specific? Elena hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I have suspicions, but I need proof before I can act.
Accusing the wrong person would be catastrophic for morale and security. I need to be absolutely certain before I confront anyone. Marcus understood the gravity of what Elena was describing. If she was wrong about who was betraying her organization, she could end up eliminating a loyal member of her team while allowing the real traitor to continue operating. But if she was right and failed to stop the leak, her entire operation could be compromised and her clients could be put at risk. Assuming I help you identify the leak, Marcus said carefully, what happens to that person? Elena's expression became serious. That would depend on the circumstances. If it's someone who was coerced or blackmailed into cooperating with law enforcement, we might be able to resolve the situation without permanent consequences. If it's someone who betrayed us voluntarily for money or personal reasons, the consequences would be more severe. How severe? Elena met his gaze directly. Marcus, I can't have someone in my organization who actively works against the safety of my clients. If someone has made a conscious decision to betray people who are depending on us to protect them, I can't allow that person to continue operating. Marcus understood that Elena was telling him that the traitor would likely be killed. It was a harsh reality, but he was beginning to understand the logic behind it. Elena's organization existed to protect people who were already at extreme risk. Anyone who compromised that protection was essentially putting innocent lives in danger. All right, Marcus said finally. What do you need me to do? Elena smiled, and Marcus saw genuine warmth and affection in her expression. Thank you for trusting me, she said softly. I know how difficult this must be for you. Over the next hour, Elena outlined a plan for accessing the information she needed without creating obvious traces that could be linked back to Marcus. The process would require Marcus to make several database queries over the course of a week.
using his legitimate access as a maritime insurance investigator to gather intelligence reports and shipping data. The key is to make it look like routine insurance investigation work, Elena explained. You'll be researching vessel tracking data and cargo manifests for what appears to be a standard fraud investigation. Nothing that would raise suspicions with your supervisors or IT security. Marcus felt a sick knot forming in his stomach as he realized what he was agreeing to do. He was about to become an active participant in Elena's criminal organization, using his professional access and credentials to help her identify and eliminate a security threat. But when he looked at the files of Elena's clients scattered across her coffee table, Marcus reminded himself of what was at stake. These were real people facing genuine dangers, families with children who needed protection that legal systems could not provide quickly enough to save them.
When do we start? Marcus asked. Monday, Elena replied. I'll give you a list of specific queries to run and databases to access. We should have the information we need within a week.
Elena stood up and walked over to where Marcus was sitting, then leaned down and kissed him softly. I know this isn't the relationship you thought you were getting into, she said.
But Marcus, we're going to do important work together. We're going to save lives.
As Marcus drove home that night, he tried to process the magnitude of the decision he had just made. In agreeing to help Elena identify the security leak in her organization, he had crossed a line from which there would be no return.
He was now officially a criminal, an accomplice to federal crimes that could result in decades in prison. But he was also, he told himself, someone who was helping to protect genuine refugees and asylum seekers who desperately needed assistance. Elena's clients were not criminals or opportunists. They were victims of political persecution, ethnic violence, and criminal threats who needed help that legal immigration processes could not provide in time to save them. The following Monday, Marcus began the most ethically complicated week of his professional life. Using his access to maritime insurance databases, he started running the queries that Elena had requested, gathering intelligence reports and shipping data that would help her identify the source of information leaks to law enforcement. The work was technically straightforward but emotionally exhausting. Every database query and every report that Marcus accessed brought him deeper into Elena's world, making him a more active participant in her criminal enterprise. Yet every file he reviewed reinforced his understanding of why Elena's work was important and why the security leak needed to be identified and stopped. By Thursday, the pattern had become clear. Someone in Elena's organization was providing law enforcement with real-time intelligence about vessel movements, client schedules, and operational plans. The timing and specificity of interdiction attempts left no doubt that authorities were receiving detailed insider information. More troubling was Marcus's discovery that the intelligence being passed to law enforcement was accurate enough to put Elena's clients at serious risk. Several recent interdiction attempts had come very close to capturing families and individuals who would likely face imprisonment or death if they were returned to their countries of origin. On Friday evening, Marcus met Elena at her apartment to share his findings. The evidence he had gathered pointed clearly to one individual, Captain Roberto Mendez, the commander of Elena's largest vessel and one of her most trusted lieutenants. Roberto, Elena said quietly, staring at the evidence Marcus had compiled. I've known him for 6 years. He's transported over 100 clients safely.
The pattern is clear, Marcus said, though he took no satisfaction in delivering such devastating news. He's the only person who had access to all the operational information that's been leaked to law enforcement. Elena was silent for several minutes, studying the data Marcus had gathered. When she finally looked up, her expression was a mixture of sadness and grim determination. You're right, she said simply. Roberto is the leak. What are you going to do? Elena stood up and walked to her communication equipment, beginning to compose what appeared to be an encrypted message.
I'm going to arrange a meeting with Roberto.
I need to understand why he betrayed us and how much damage he's done. And then? Elena paused in her typing and looked back at Marcus. And then I'm going to do what's necessary to protect my clients and my organization. Roberto Mendez, despite his 6 years of service and his successful transport of over 100 clients, was going to be killed for his betrayal. Elena, Marcus said quietly, are you sure there's no other way? Elena's expression softened slightly. Marcus, Roberto's actions could have gotten innocent people killed. He made a choice to betray families who were depending on us to protect them. I can't allow that to continue. The next day, Elena arranged to meet Roberto at a safe house in Homestead, south of Miami. She told him that she needed to discuss a new high-value client and requested that he come alone. Marcus was not invited to participate in the confrontation, and Elena made it clear that she preferred to handle the situation personally. Elena left her apartment at 4 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, carrying a small bag that Marcus suspected contained a weapon. She kissed him goodbye at the door, and Marcus realized that he might never see her again. Either Elena would eliminate the security threat and continue her operations, or the confrontation with Roberto would go badly and Elena herself might not return. "Be careful," Marcus said, holding her close. "I will," Elena promised.
This will all be over soon, and then we can focus on building something together. Marcus spent Saturday evening alone in Elena's apartment, watching the tracking displays that showed the positions of her fleet and wondering what was happening at the safe house and homestead.
The real-time data showed that several of Elena's vessels were approaching pickup locations, preparing to transport new clients to safety. At 11 o'clock that night, Elena returned to her apartment.
She looked tired and emotionally drained, but she was unharmed. "It's finished," she said simply, setting her bag down by the door.
Marcus didn't ask for details, and Elena didn't offer any. Roberto Mendez had been eliminated as a security threat, and Elena's organization could continue its work of transporting political refugees and asylum seekers to safety. Over the next several weeks, Marcus found himself becoming increasingly involved in Elena's operations. His access to maritime insurance databases proved invaluable for route planning and security analysis, and Elena began consulting with him regularly on operational decisions.
Marcus discovered that he had a natural aptitude for the kind of strategic thinking that Elena's work required. His investigative skills and attention to detail made him an effective intelligence analyst, and his understanding of law enforcement procedures helped Elena's organization avoid detection and interdiction.
More importantly, Marcus found that he genuinely believed in the work they were doing together. Every client file he reviewed reinforced his understanding that Elena's organization was providing a vital service to people who desperately needed help. They were not facilitating criminal activity, but rather filling gaps in legal immigration and asylum processes that often failed people facing immediate dangers. 6 months after their first meeting in that small cafe near the Miami port, Marcus Chen had become Elena Vasquez's partner in both love and crime. He had left his career as a maritime insurance investigator and was now the intelligence director for one of the most sophisticated human smuggling operations in the Caribbean. Marcus often thought about that moment when he had offered to buy Elena a Coca-Cola, a simple act of kindness that had seemed so innocent at the time. He had no way of knowing that this gesture would lead him into a world of federal crimes, moral ambiguity, and life and death decisions that would challenge everything he thought he knew about right and wrong.
But he also had no regrets.
Working with Elena, Marcus had helped transport dozens of families to safety, providing protection and new opportunities to people fleeing genuine persecution and violence. The work was dangerous and illegal, but it was also meaningful in ways that his previous career had never been.
Late at night, when he and Elena reviewed intelligence reports and planned operations in her command center apartment, Marcus sometimes reflected on how much his life had changed. He had fallen in love with a woman who commanded a fleet of vessels and employed over 30 people in a sophisticated international operation. He had become a criminal, but he was also helping to save lives. The sip of Coca-Cola that had started their relationship had indeed sparked a nightmare of moral complexity and personal danger, but it had also led Marcus to discover who he really was when everything he thought he believed was challenged by the realities of a world where sometimes doing the right thing required breaking the law.
Elena had been right when she said they could accomplish extraordinary things together. They were protecting people that legal systems had failed, providing safety and hope to families facing persecution and violence.
It was work that came with enormous risks and terrible moral costs, but it was also work that made a genuine difference in the lives of people who desperately needed help. Marcus Chen had bought Elena Rodriguez a Coca-Cola as a simple act of kindness. In return, she had shown him a world where kindness sometimes required breaking rules, where protecting innocent people sometimes meant becoming a criminal, and where love could flourish even in the most dangerous and morally ambiguous circumstances. The nightmare that had begun with that innocent gesture had become the most meaningful work of Marcus's life.
He was no longer the man he had been 6 months earlier, but he was perhaps the man he was always meant to become.